He had 90 days. 90 days to save a company that was already dead on paper. No money, no hit products, no hope. The board had tried to sell it. Nobody even wanted to buy it. This was Apple Computer, the company that had started the entire personal computer revolution. The company that had made 300 ordinary employees into millionaires in a single morning. Now, worth less than a small chain of grocery stores. And the only man on earth who could save it was the same man they had thrown out like trash 12 years earlier. The man they had humiliated. The man they had stripped of his team, his office, his title, and finally, his company. They called him too difficult, too obsessive, too dangerous to keep around. His name was Steve Jobs. And what he did next, starting from that 90-day countdown, would build the most valuable company in human history. But here is the part nobody ever talks about. The betrayal that created this entire story did not start with Apple firing Steve Jobs. It started with Steve Jobs himself. It started with a single question he asked a man over lunch in 1983. A question so powerful that the man left his entire career behind to answer.
February 24th, 1955. San Francisco, California. A baby boy is born. His biological mother, a young graduate student, cannot keep him. His biological father, a Syrian man named Abdul Fattah Jandali, agrees. The baby is put up for adoption. He will be named Stephen Paul Jobs. Paul and Clara Jobs adopt him. Paul fixes cars for a living. Clara is a bookkeeper. They move to a quiet suburb called Mountain View, California. You know that neighborhood today by a different name, Silicon Valley. From the beginning, Steve is different. At 13 years old, 13, he picks up the phone and calls Bill Hewlett, co-founder of Hewlett-Packard, one of the most powerful men in tech at the time. Steve asks him for spare parts for a project he is building. Most adults would have laughed and hung up. Hewlett does not. He gives the kid the parts, and then he gives him a summer job. That summer, Steve meets a slightly older, quieter engineer, also working at HP. His name is Steve Wozniak. The world will never be the same. In 1972, Steve enrolls at Reed College in Oregon. He drops out after one semester. Not because he is lazy, because he refuses to spend his adoptive parents' life savings on classes he does not care about. But he stays on campus for 18 months, sleeping on floors, eating free meals at the Hare Krishna temple, collecting soda bottles for spare change. And he keeps sneaking into one class, a calligraphy class. Beautiful letters, beautiful spacing, beautiful fonts. Completely useless, right?
1976. Steve Jobs is 21 years old. He and Wozniak have already been selling an illegal device called the Blue Box, a gadget that lets people make free long-distance phone calls. It works brilliantly. They make real money. And something clicks inside Jobs. Electronics plus smart marketing equals profit. If they could do this with something illegal, imagine what they could build if they went legitimate. Wozniak has something extraordinary, a personal computer. Not for corporations, not for governments, for regular people. Jobs sees it immediately. They are selling this. They sell Jobs' Volkswagen minibus. They sell Wozniak's calculator. Total, $1,300. They set up in the Jobs family garage in Cupertino, California. April 1st, 1976, Apple Computer Company is born. Their first product, the Apple I, sells for $666 each. In 1977, the Apple II launches. Color graphics, a plastic case, easy to use. It becomes the first truly successful mass-produced personal computer in history. In 1980, Apple goes public. It is the largest IPO since Ford Motor Company in 1956. 300 employees become millionaires in a single morning. Steve Jobs, 25 years old, is suddenly worth $250 million. The kid nobody wanted on the Forbes list of America's richest people at 25. Here is where Steve Jobs makes the biggest mistake of his life. And the devastating part, he makes it with the best of intentions. By 1983, Apple is exploding. Jobs knows he needs help running it. He's a visionary, a product genius, but managing a huge corporation is a completely different skill. So he goes looking for the best CEO in America. He finds John Sculley, president of Pepsi Cola, marketing genius, the man credited with turning Pepsi into a global empire. Jobs flies to New York, meets Sculley at a restaurant, looks him in the eye, and asks him the question that will become one of the most famous lines in business history. Do you want to spend the rest of your life selling sugared water to children, or do you want a chance to change the world? Sculley quits Pepsi, joins Apple as CEO. Jobs believes he has found his perfect partner. He has no idea he has just invited the man who will destroy him through the front door.
The cracks appear fast. In 1983, Apple launches the Lisa computer. It costs $10,000. Almost nobody buys it. Jobs is furious. He pivots everything to the Macintosh. He builds a team inside Apple that literally flies a pirate flag above their building. He tells them it is better to be a pirate than to join the Navy. January 22nd, 1984. Super Bowl. 100 million Americans watching. Apple runs a 60-second commercial. A lone woman. A gray dystopian crowd. A massive screen. A hammer thrown. Then the words. On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh, and you will see why 1984 will not be like 1984. It is one of the greatest advertisements ever made. 3 days later, the Macintosh launches to a roaring crowd. Jobs is at the absolute peak of his powers. But the Macintosh has a problem. It is beautiful. It is revolutionary. It is too expensive for most people to buy. Sales disappoint. And Sculley, the man Jobs recruited, begins whispering to the board. April 10th, 1985. Apple's board meets. Sculley stands up and delivers an ultimatum. Either Steve Jobs is removed from the Macintosh division, or Sculley himself will resign. The board takes a vote. It is unanimous. They side with Sculley. Jobs tries to fight back. He secretly plans a coup to remove Sculley instead. But one of his own colleagues tells Sculley everything. The coup fails before it begins. Jobs makes one final plea. He begs for any role at all. Just let him stay. The board says no. They give him an office. No team, no responsibilities, no power. Jobs called it Siberia. September 17th, 1985. Steve Jobs submits his resignation letter. He is 30 years old. He writes to a friend, I feel like somebody just punched me in the stomach and knocked all my wind out. I am only 30 years old, and I want a chance to continue creating things. And Apple is not going to give me that chance. The man who built Apple from a garage. Gone. And Apple had absolutely no idea what it had just lost. The years after are brutal. Jobs pours $12 million of his own money into a new company called Next. They build beautiful computers. They barely sell. But something extraordinary is happening at Next that the world completely ignores. The software they build, called Next Step, is the most advanced operating system ever created. A young British scientist named Tim Berners-Lee uses a Next computer to invent the World Wide Web. The internet as you know it, born on a machine built by the man Apple threw away. And then Jobs makes a second move. In 1986, he pays $10 million to buy a small, struggling animation studio from Lucasfilm. Its employees have one idea they believe in: a computer-animated film they call Toy Story. That studio is called Pixar. 9 years later, Toy Story earns $373 million at the global box office. Pixar goes public. Steve Jobs, the man Apple discarded, is suddenly worth $1.5 billion from a company he bought for $10 million. While Apple is crumbling.
After Jobs leaves, Apple launches product after product that fails. The Newton Message Pad, a $700 personal organizer that becomes a cultural punchline. CEO after CEO after CEO. None of them can stop the bleeding. By 1996, Apple is losing money so fast, the board is privately trying to sell the company. Nobody wants it, not even at a discount. Fortune magazine calls Apple, and I am quoting exactly here, Silicon Valley's paragon of dysfunctional management and fumbled techno dreams. The stock has fallen 80%. Apple is 90 days from bankruptcy. 11 years after firing Steve Jobs, they need him back. They try to buy a company called B for their new operating system. The founder asks $400 million. Apple says no. They turn to their last option. They call Steve Jobs. They offer to acquire Next for $429 million. Jobs accepts. And just like that, the exile is over.
September 16th, 1997. 12 years after being thrown out of his own company, Steve Jobs walks back into Apple as interim CEO. The company has 90 days of cash left, stock trading at $3.50. He sits down, looks at what Apple is making, 40 different products, dozens of models nobody understands. He takes a whiteboard marker, draws a 2x2 grid. Consumer, professional, desktop, portable. He looks at the team and says, "We are building 4 great products, one for each box. Everything else is canceled." 70% of Apple's product line, gone, overnight. Then he calls Bill Gates, his oldest rival, and negotiates a $150 million investment from Microsoft into Apple. He announces the deal on stage at the Macworld conference. The audience boos, loudly. Jobs stands completely still, completely calm. He says, "If we want Apple to be healthy again, we have to let go of the idea that for Apple to win, Microsoft has to lose." The booing stops, because everyone in that room knows he is right. Then he launches the Think Different campaign. No product features, no technical specifications. Just Einstein, Gandhi, Muhammad Ali, Martin Luther King, the rebels, the misfits. And the words, here is to the crazy ones, the ones who see things differently. They push the human race forward. Apple has its soul back.
It is the most profitable product in the history of capitalism. Built by a man his own board had sent to Siberia. 1998, the iMac, a translucent blue plastic computer. Round, beautiful, nothing like it has ever existed. Industry experts call it a toy. Consumers buy 800,000 units in the first 5 months. Apple turns a profit for the first time in 3 years. 2001, Jobs walks on stage, holds up a small white device. He says, 1,000 songs in your pocket. The iPod. By 2007, Apple has sold 100 million iPods. 100 million. Apple is no longer a computer company. It is a culture. January 9th, 2007. Macworld Conference, San Francisco. Jobs steps on stage wearing his signature black turtleneck and jeans. He pauses, looks at the audience. He says, every once in a while, a revolutionary product comes along that changes everything. Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone. The iPhone, a phone, an iPod, an internet device, all in one. No keyboard, just glass and touch. Microsoft CEO Steve Ballmer laughs at it on camera. He says there is no chance the iPhone is going to get any significant market share. No chance. Today, there are 2.5 billion active iPhones in the world. The iPhone alone generates more revenue every single year than almost every other company on Earth.
In 2003, while Apple is at its absolute peak, Steve Jobs gets a diagnosis: pancreatic cancer, a rare form, operable, survivable, if treated immediately. Jobs delays surgery for 9 months. He tries alternative treatments. He believes he can think his way out of it. It is the decision he will regret most. He eventually has the operation, has a liver transplant in 2009, keeps working. In 2010, he introduces the iPad, keeps working. In August 2011, visibly frail, barely able to stand, he steps down as CEO and hands the company to Tim Cook. His final public appearance is presenting plans for Apple Park, the circular campus in Cupertino, to the Cupertino City Council. October 5th, 2011. Steve Jobs dies at home, surrounded by his family. He is 56 years old. When he was fired from Apple in 1985, the company was worth $2 billion. When he died, it was worth $350 billion. Today, Apple is worth $3.7 trillion, the most valuable company on Earth. Built twice by the same man, the man they fired from his own company.
Near the end of his life, Jobs gives a commencement speech at Stanford University. He tells 3 stories, and he ends with this: you cannot connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backward. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. The calligraphy class that gave Apple its fonts, the exile that produced Pixar, Next, and the operating system that saved Apple, the cancer that forced him to finally ask what truly mattered. None of it made sense looking forward. All of it made perfect sense looking back. John Sculley, the man who engineered Jobs' removal, later called him the greatest CEO who ever lived. The Apple board, who voted unanimously to strip Jobs of power, spent 12 years watching their company slowly die without him. Steve Ballmer, the man who laughed at the iPhone, watched Microsoft get left behind, while Apple became the most valuable company in human history. The lesson of Steve Jobs is not about genius. It is about what happens when you refuse to let betrayal define you, when you refuse to accept that your best work is already behind you, when you refuse to stop building, even when the whole world has written you off. Steve Jobs was adopted. He was a college dropout. He was fired from his own company at 30. He was told no more times than most people ever hear the word. And yet, the device you are probably listening to this on right now, the shape of it, the weight of it, the way it feels in your hand, was designed by a man his own board once sent to Siberia. That is the story of Steve Jobs. That is the story of Apple. Subscribe for the next Empire story, because they only get more extraordinary from here.